I was watching an interview that Chris Williamson did with Dominic Cummings, and one thing Dominic mentions is the fall in the number of competent people, capable people who want to go into government or want to go into the civil service, and that this has been taking place over several decades, both in the UK and even in the USA. And he makes a good point, which is that in the USA, there's still a tremendous amount of economic innovation. Silicon Valley, best example of this, attracting immigrants from all over the world and having the environment that fosters the creation of great new companies and new innovations and new technologies in a way that the UK simply doesn't have. But both places, he said, have this issue of the really elite people, the really competent and intelligent people not wanting to go into government by and large. Of course, there are competent people in government, but most people who have a great ability choose to go to the private sector because they don't really want to be involved in government, because they just see what a sorry state it's in. And I think this is a large problem for any society. And I almost wonder if this is a problem for any developed society. You have to attract the best talent into government. You have to, because government determines the nature of your country, the nature of your society. And so if you don't have the best people in there, then eventually it affects the lives of everybody in the country. It's very different from a company needing to attract the best talent. If a company is unable to attract the best talent, well, what's the worst that happens? The company fails. Now, if the company is a key supplier in the country, let's say the company runs all the buses in this country, then this could really affect the country, right? But most companies aren't in that position. But that also shows why it's important that government functions really well. And increasingly in a globalized world where you're competing against other countries on trade terms and you're trading with them, you have to be competitive. You have to be internationally competitive, which means you have to keep doing things mostly correct, mostly the right way. You can't let your foot off the gas pedal. This is especially true for countries that have already achieved a level of success historically. And so they have that legacy of success. They have a good quality of life. So they have something that they'd like to at least defend, if not at least improve. But countries that are, of course, struggling, that are still poor, they've almost got nothing to lose. So if they have a bad leadership, well, it's just a continuation of what they had before. But countries that had good leadership historically or came out well over the last century, if they now have bad leadership, that's going to affect their standing and reduce the quality of life for their citizens, and the citizens will notice this. So good leadership is really, really important, and to cultivate good leadership, you need to cultivate talent. And to cultivate talent, you have to reward people well. You have to almost explain to them, almost sell them on the idea of civil service. But that means having a great civil service that's run well, so that attracts people, so that they think, you know what, I've got great skills, great intelligence, where do I want to work? I'm going to go work for my country because I see what a great job my governments are doing. And I think a lot of people join government with that attitude. They want to help the country, they want to make things better, and then they get disillusioned. And that's something he mentions in his interview, that people leave kind of 5-10 years after they start because they're just so fed up with what's going on. So I think this is a problem for the UK, especially, and I'm not sure what the solution is. I think we need a radical rethink in terms of the culture of government and the attitude that politicians have towards the country and the future. I think in some sense we need a big vision of wanting to lead the world in technology, wanting to lead the world in things of the future, basically, not just technology, but how we run society, how we organize things. Britain at one point was the largest empire in the world, and it did lead the world in technology at one point. So it's not like it can't do it. And we have the talent, we have the people there. It just requires leadership, it requires restructuring things. It's a big ask. I don't think it's going to happen at the moment. But I think it could eventually happen once people there really understand and realize how they're falling behind. And I think to some extent this applies to Europe as a whole. There's a great tweet by Levels that I read where he said the average European's life is reduced to running American-made software on Chinese-made hardware, which I thought was hilarious. I mean, it's slightly disingenuous because, of course, there are European companies like ASML that contribute towards semiconductor technology, will contribute massively, for example. But the overall gist of his point stands, which is that Europe doesn't really lead in any consumer technology, major hardware technology category, as far as I can see. Europe has great technology companies, it has great institutions, but it's not really on the map, so to speak. When we think of where the next innovation in mobile phones is going to come from, we're not thinking Europe. We're thinking US, or we're thinking the East, the Far East. So anyway, I'm curious to see what Europe does about this. They are aware of the fact that they're behind in technology, especially AI technology. The UK, honestly, given that we've had Brexit, which you can argue is good or bad, but the one thing you can say is that it means the UK is free to set its own rules and decide how it wants to go about its foreign policy, its industrial policy, without needing to confer with EU partners. The UK really ought to be taking control of this and going full steam ahead, but it's not doing that, and it's because we don't have competent people in governments.